Chapter 4 The Last Laugh. Ed steps forward and vanishes through the portal. His foot lands on the metal floor of the control room. It is just as he had left it, with 3 exceptions. 1, the systems are shut down. 2, the sword is gone. 3, Carla and Joachim are tied to chairs. Ed eases Dave onto the one free seat. Carla is asleep. Joachim opens his eyes in a haze and then widens them with excitement. Ed places the sword on the control board and starts to untie his boss. When the gag is pulled from his mouth, Joachim begins his questions. "How did you get the sword back?" "This isn't our sword. It's just an insurance that will get ours back," Ed replies. "What happened? Where did you 2 go?" Joachim continues. "It's a long story." Ed becomes quiet as he unties Joachim's hands. Joachim looks at the slackened body of Dave slowly spinning on the swivel of the office chair. "What happened to him?" Joachim asks, untying his own feet. "I'm not sure. Take a look at him," Ed says as he moves to Carla. As soon as he touches her gag, she snaps awake, lifting her head and spitting out the cloth. "Thank God! How long have we been here?" she asks. "A day is my guess," Joachim says, examining David. "Take a look at this," he continues, waving to the other 2. He lifts up Dave's right eyelid to reveal large, dark eyes. They seem completely dilated. He places his hand near Dave's nose. "I can't feel his breath." Carla moves closer. His chest is moving, just really slow. "He's breathing, but it's almost too faint to notice," she says. Joachim puts 2 fingers on Dave's neck. No pulse. Carla places her hand palm down on the chest. She is silent for a few seconds. "There," she says, grabbing Joachim's hand and placing it under hers. When he feels the soft thump after a moment, she continues. "His heartbeat is weak, but it's there." Joachim turns his head towards her. Is that his or mine? Ed steps forward and taps Carla on the back. "You thank God. How about thanking me?" Carla smiles and stands. "Thank you," she says, placing a hand on his right bicep. "Do you know what happened to him?" she asks, removing her hand and gesturing towards Dave. "He took some kind of shock from that crystal right before we made our exit of the party that Joker sent us to." Ed looks at Joachim and hesitates for a breath. "What happened to Jason?" "Well, after he zapped you 2 to who knows where, we struggled for the crystal, and I have to say that he got the best of me. He knocked me out, and when I came to, I was tied up," Joachim says. Carla continues. "After he went down, Jason turned to me and requested I sit down and not move. I did like he asked and waited as he tied up Joachim. Then I waited as he locked me in the room and got the sword. He came back in and said that I had been good and he was sorry, but that this was the only way. Then he walked behind me and knocked me out on the head with something hard. When I woke up, I was tied up too." Ed becomes agitated. "This isn't helping any." Joachim and Carla look distressed. They both want to explain the fear of being tied up underground and left to starve and dehydrate. They want to explain the twisted irony in leaving them facing each other so that they both should see the other wither and die. The worst part, being unable to communicate outside of muffled grunts and eyes. "How is this going to lead us to him? I'm sorry," Ed says, reacting to their facial expressions. "I know this has been rough for you, but I can't tell you how important it is that we find him. What I've seen is so horrible that if it can't be stopped, I say we annihilate the entire Earth to save face." Ed takes a deep breath to continue. "It's a corruption of nature that we are up against. I know you are not able to tell me, but maybe you can help me figure out where the hell Jason went. New York, the voice says. Joachim and Carla turn around to see David rise out of the chair and walk towards them. Carla notices a grace in his stride. Joachim notes his deeper voice. Ed recognizes the face, but not the man behind it. He still seeks a means of justification to solidify his existence before he can act freely. His alibi for his extremes resides in New York. He gestures towards Carla. That is where he lives, yes? She nods, mesmerized by the large round pupils that allow only a sliver of white, not thicker than 3 hairs, to be seen on either side. Then he is returning there at this moment to meet himself. What are you talking about? Ed says loudly. Joachim raises his palm at Ed and speaks to David. How do you know this? I am the axis on which this world balances. Good and evil, right and wrong, acts of fate and chance are all understood by me. I have a degree of faith that surpasses anything you can imagine, he says, pivoting on his hips to face all three. I'm centuries ahead of you. There is a silence that seems to quell the doubts of the others. No one moves to challenge the claims of the Axis, and he reveals no deception in his manner. His face is positioned so that his enhanced peripheral vision can clearly see all three people. He wears an expression of simply being aware that time must pass. If we know he's there, Ed says, moving towards the door, then we better get going. He starts to ram his shoulder against the door. It's locked, he concludes. Where are the keys? Carla asks, glancing at Joachim's pockets, then looking into his eyes. That joker has them, the Axis answers. Why are you calling him Joker? Carla asks. Ed is already taking apart the lock, so her vision falls on David. Her smile shows me that she sees the change, how David returns to the basic knowledge of the Axis, how the essence of his spirit grows, first faintly, then steadily so behind the eyes. As far as I can figure, the Axis says, walking towards the door, he's the manifestation of Jason's subconscious. He moves Ed aside and kneels down in front of the door. His eyes lock on a point far away but straight ahead. So speaking, he begins the graceful motion of his hand. His voice becomes monotone. It seems possible that Jason just happened to dream of a world that the actual conscious world became after the passing of many years. Somehow, his player in his subconscious world managed to latch on to the plasmic core of the organic computer from the far future. His emotion brings his conscious pattern to live on until actual interface. And voila, he has opened the door to a new life after death. As he spoke, his eyes deconstructed the heavy door and lock mechanism. You could say that he saw through it. He simply knew what the door was and how the lock worked. David's soul took control, and he retrieved the ability to slow down the metabolic cycles of the cells that comprise him. After slowing them down to the point of antimatter, he bounced off a preset ceiling and raised the cycles to such a degree as to lift his hand, Anya, to the fourth dimension, not being where the door is as he moved his hand forward. Beyond the door, he lowered his hand, Kata, back to the shared reality. To Ed, Carla, and Joachim, it must have looked as if the door had simply engulfed a length of the right arm up to the bicep as the hand opened the door from the outside. The door swings on its heavy hinges, and his arm straightens out, repeating the Anna Kata motion until it clears the door. The Axis stands, noticing that none of the three have understood a word of what he had said, but are stunned at the feat just performed. He motions for them to move through the door. Once outside, "I need the location of the largest energy reservoir nearest to a generator," he says, turning to Ed. "With enough raw energy, I can create the teleportation we have experienced." Ed turns to Joachim. "Instantaneous transportation. We're going to need it to catch up to that Joker. He's at least a day ahead of us." "At least," the Axis mumbled. They walk across the main room after the elevator brought them to the ground floor. They exit through the main doors and make their way to the east to circle the structure. The conduit chosen is one near the north waterfall. The four trudge up the hill in the moist breeze of the morning. The sky is beginning to shift its spectrum as the sun rises. The colors are more magnificent than I can describe. Through the eyes of the Axis, I see every beam of light bending gently, as though they are threads of a feather. They turn north and begin to climb the hill. They walk in single file. David in the lead, followed by Ed and Joachim, then Carla, taking her time and admiring the sunrise. As they walk, I make Dave aware of the four silhouettes that they all are. Through the Axis, he shows me hope that someone is at the proper angle to see such a picture. Upon reaching the conduit, the Axis begins to soak up the energy. He makes it clear to his companions that they need not come along, as there would be danger ahead. They each reply that they have proper claim to take part in this risk. Joachim cites the stolen sword and revenge, on which Ed joins. Carla wants to make sure that the real Jason would be all right. David adjusts the program pattern and manages to create a dual destination teleportation. He informs them that Joachim and Carla will be going to Jason's apartment, while he and Ed will land in the largest power generation plant on Manhattan, as the Axis would need to draw energy after such an innovative action. Ed will be joining David in case that Joker is there also, recharging his damn crystal. Joachim expresses concern for safety. Ed reassures him. The Axis turns away. The sound of the cool water rushing down the hillside, then silence. A flash of brilliant light that illuminates the valley, and we are gone. Upon completion of everyone's molecular structure, I recognize the fact that the vessel of David's body is far too fragile for me to continue to interface myself with him. He retains all that I have given him, but I severed the connection for his sake. He is tired and spent and needs a moment or two to recover. I switch my perspective to Joker by homing in on his neural patterns. As time would tell, the Axis would have only moments. I am suddenly alongside that Joker and immediately access his primary thoughts and short-term memory. As it seems, he had come to the residence of himself. He told Jason the tale of what he had experienced and pressed hard into his original self the importance of a download into the crystallic ascension he held in his hand. Jason was weary and stared at the sword, intrigued by the allure of the power this mirror image was offering him. He said it would be simple. He need only take a copy of certain key elements in carbon-based consciousness, and then they would live on forever, transcending both time and space. What would become of this body? Jason asked his own self. You would retain it and keep this extension of awareness and limitations until its time had run out, Joker answered. Jason was silent, thinking. If I do let you extend my consciousness into adventures unimaginable, what fun could I find in the life I lead now? He placed a hand on the shoulder of Joker. No, myself. I could not commit such a mistake, and if you were truly me, you'd know that I would not. Joker places his hand on Jason's shoulder. Perhaps you don't know your limitations, he said as he thrust the sword through Jason's stomach. Jason gasped as he crumpled forward. He would have fallen to the floor had not Joker held him in place with the weapon. He moved his face close to his victim's. His words came quick in a hissing whisper. I have pulled what was left of you back from death and fought my way to this moment not to be denied. You say you don't want to lose the thrill you feel in this life? Well, in a few moments this life is going to be over, and you will take me along unless you download yourself and live on through me. He held the crystal up to the paling face of Jason. Now, I, for one, would not like to die today, so I implore you. He placed the crystal under Jason's hands. Jason's eyes began to dilate as death overtook him. Somewhere between the last moments of life and the chilled seconds when his limp body slumped to the floor, he allowed the crystal to house his bioinformation as well as a degree of his consciousness. He now has control of the crystal from the inside. All this is made known to me in a matter of nanoseconds, although it has occurred more than 15 minutes ago. That Joker quietly pays respect to the dearly departed. He then goes into the bedroom closet and retrieves from memory his emergency revolver. The weapon was purchased 3 months ago on a whim after some neighborhood burglaries. The weapon looks so impersonal compared to the smooth beauty of the sword, but a weapon it is, and he might need it where he's going. Again, I can tell he has a plan, but he manages to keep it hidden from me by conforming his thoughts to an unforeseeable pattern. I am left to scan thoughts as meaningless as the plight of a drop of rain, yet more specific than a DNA code. He walks back into the living room and waits for the transfer to reach completion. He seems to experience a sense of solidification, as if only now he is a true and real being. After Jason dies, he begins to gather energy to fulfill the combined will of his two perspectives. 5 seconds ago, Carla and Joachim teleported into the room and into his line of vision. He places his crystal self in his pocket and tosses a set of keys at Joachim as Carla rushes to the bleeding and lifeless body of Jason. Joker holds the sword in his hand and comments about the lack of energy, smiling into the cold stare of Joachim, who is calculating how to reclaim the sword without killing himself. Before he can act, however, that Joker vanishes. Being inside him, I know that he is frustrated by the lack of energy available for him to collect. He can sense my presence, but is unable to draw anything from me. Even in his new crystallic form, he is undaunted as he travels to the location the Axis had foreseen. He stands among shadows. He has used most of his energy to perform the separation and reconstruction process. I have had time to access part of his memory, although not his plan. I search for the machinations and computations for his next move, but he blocks me by replaying an event from my history that triggers his current movement. It came to be, sometime in the 2300s, that humanity had beat itself into a corner. Over some 3 centuries, the nations that dominated the land were destroyed on the massive global battlefield or collapsed due to internal problems. One group of humans, originating from the southeast corner of Asia, managed to stabilize the world. The American continents mimicked the ruling system and destroyed the mother society. One government ran the world, and the corruption could not be halted. It's scary for me to imagine one bloodline ruling the world for as long as the Taurics did. 10 generations over 400 years, each man living longer than his predecessor. After the Great Wartime, during which humanity had polluted or otherwise destroyed the habitable lands, humans managed to erect giant metallic pyramids. They used enormous concrete pontoons to float the cities off the coasts of most continents. These tetra-cities were the residence of millions of humans for centuries. Life was never more civilized, and freedom never more restricted. Small groups of people managed to survive on the outside and worked together to heal the land. By 2846, the numbers of those outside were greater than those inside. Against all odds and greater technology, a woman led the outsider troops to victory over the tyrannical hand of the peacekeepers. Those 400 years that 10 Tauric men ruled could have been avoided. That whole period of unproductivity could be erased from history with a little visit to the original Tauric. Liao is his name, I believe, and I hear he has a sword just like mine. That is all he let me know, but from that portion of history, I get the idea of what he is going to do. My guess is that he'll burst ahead to the beginning of the Tauric's rule and infuse that time with the technology in the crystal. This would not allow the rebellion to rise up and overthrow the oppressors, and will keep humanity teetering on the plateau below the state of consciousness that accompanied the awakening of the soul. He'll bring the progression of evolution to a sudden halt, and humanity will become unchanging and mechanical. The man who created me will not reach enlightenment, and I will cease to exist. Not while the Axis is roaming about. I have a visual fix on this Joker's location, then I switch my vantage point to the Axis and experience the mind of David. It seems that David is unclear as to the power that has inhabited his body. He welcomes it and grants it access to as much of himself as he has, but he is not sure as to the origin of this power. He believes it might be something from a dimension not his own, or perhaps the soul of an angelic creature that is helping him along his journey. Whatever the entity that possesses his body is, he became confused when I momentarily abandoned him. He sits with legs crossed on the floor of the power plant, meditating. Subconsciously, he is repairing the damage I have caused him internally. His eyes spring open upon my reconnection to his neural actions. I can see Edmund pacing back and forth with sword in hand, looking around nervously. I make the location of Joker known to my new host, and the Axis stands and walks through the mental map of the plant. Ed grabs his shoulder, asking where he is going, turning his dark eyes to his companion. The Axis silently motions towards Joker's direction. "You sure?" Ed asks. The Axis smiles as he turns to continue walking. Ed moves to the right to try to circle around behind the menace. I tell the Axis that Joker is building up energy and preparing to burst ahead some 400 years to cause major damage to my timeline. If he is gathering energy, then he could absorb any bolt that the Axis can throw at him. David's mind makes a variation of the exponential generation program, so it produces, for lack of a better term, a void beam, a bolt of pure nothingness that will drain the essence of that Joker's energy and scatter his molecules to the farthest reaches of space. The electricity the Axis is gathering from the generators is being converted into this void energy. For every volt converted, he generates 3 volts inside his body, mind, and soul. With every step, the rush inside him grows until he notices that his arms are shaking from the raw power. His footsteps become slow and heavy, the sound reverberating off the cement walls. Joker can't take the tension and leaps out from behind the corner. He is visibly shaking and sweating. He holds his crystal self in his right hand. The sword is resting in a cloth scabbard that hangs from his left hip. The Axis wastes no time in lifting both his hands simultaneously and releasing a dark beam of anti-energy at Joker. The beam bends when centimeters away from the chest of its target. It strikes the crystal and is soaked up. From inside the crystal, Jason moves along the beam into the mind of the Axis, where he steals the format for the exponential generation program. Realizing this, the Axis tries to stop the onslaught, as in moments that Joker will return it to him threefold. Joker has powered down the crystal enough so that it can absorb the void beam and reconvert some of it into usable energy. Reactivated, the crystal channels the return beam through Joker with his left hand as the exit point. The beam is too powerful for that Joker's body, and the shot goes wildly up to strike the wall behind the Axis. As the dark beam pours out of his arm, Joker painfully redirects his aim and lifts it to the ceiling. The beam slices through the 2 floors above and rips apart the roof. Rubble falls back in through the hole created and buries the Axis. As quickly as the silence was chased away, it returns. That Joker moves through the building, the hum of the electric generators the only sound to accompany him. That and the throaty war cry of Edmund Lewis as he runs forward with the sword drawn back for attack. Barely having time to move, Joker draws his own sword and moves to his right. Ed is upon him and swings hard. The clang of the swords resonates throughout the building. Ed begins a series of attacks, cursing and grunting with every advancement. It is clear that Ed is better suited for this form of combat as he deflects blows from his adversary with ease. Joker is stumbling back to keep himself standing. He has switched the crystal to his left hand as he defends himself with the other. He waits for the crystal to regain enough power to blast Edmund to the other side of oblivion. Ed's attack turns slightly indirect, and he cuts off Joker's left arm at the forearm. Joker screams and falls backwards. Ed swings again, knocking the sword from Joker's grip. The sword spins through the air for 7 feet before settling to the floor. Ed stands over his defeated opponent, who is trying to place his severed arm under his other arm. Ed mimics the folded arm stance and looks down at Joker. He shakes his head and walks to retrieve the other sword. As he picks it up, he notices the crystal on the ground. The left hand is still gripping it, the index finger of which is jittering up and down. Ed looks at the pile of debris his friend is buried under. The anger in him wells up, and he walks back to that Joker with every intention of chopping him up into little pieces. His mind changes, however, when he hears the gunshot. There is a fire in his stomach. He notices it and dismisses it as indigestion from all the excitement. Then he notices that Joker pointing a smoking revolver at him. He reaches down and touches his midsection. He feels the warm flow of blood and knows he has been shot. He drops one of the swords and raises the other. He begins running at Joker, who discharges 2 more bullets. A few feet from his goal, Ed collapses to the floor and falls into unconsciousness. That Joker stands up slowly and looks at his mangled stump of an arm. In anger, he points the gun down and shoots Ed again in the leg and then in the shoulder. He then drops the gun and staggers to the crystal. Activated, the crystal glows red with swirls of blue collecting on the interior. Joker removes the severed hand and places the bloodied end of his arm on the crystal's top. He closes his eyes and lets the control he has over the crystal extend to the shared reality. The generators begin whirring at alarming speeds. The crystal drains them quicker than they can produce energy. It pulls in enough power and generates more using my stolen ability to agitate the various particles in the air. With a little prodding, the particles are formed into molecules that become a dense mass of nerve endings and muscle. The crystal connects this new appendage to the body of Joker, and his arm is as good as new. He moves the hand and tests the grip on the sword that Ed has brought to him. In the distance, he can hear a police siren. He looks up through the hole in the roof and ponders a new idea. He places Ed's sword on the floor and accesses the crystal's burst ability. He memorizes the exact location of the sword and then bursts it 30 seconds into the future. He lays his own sword on the exact same spot and watches the molecular reconstruction. He lifts his new double-strength weapon and picks up the crystal again. The generators in this plant are non-functional and the police are on their way. He walks out through the hole in the wall, leaving his defeated enemies behind. I can feel the pain that David experiences. I try as best I can to sustain him with my own energy. With what I have left, I cling onto the perspective of that Joker. Joker does what he can to chase me out of his head, but after a moment, I am not even detectable. As he believes himself to finally be free of me, I am actually tagging along for the ride. He moves north and then west, cutting across the island city. He gets stares from few of the many humans that comprise the thick population. Most regard him with no great interest, as if he fits within the fashionable boundaries of the technological city's makeshift society. I can feel the generation he causes in himself as he strides. Within moments, the Axis is able to break himself free from under the large slabs and chunks of man-made stone. He pauses and looks around. There is a faint bioenergy field formed by Ed. It is fading quickly, and so David acts. It is David who acts, mind you, and not the Axis. The Axis is the melding point between us, and Dave uses my ability through his conscious self. David takes control and lets his emission, the energy behind emotion, guide the fate of our Axis. He pulls a direct current from the last operational generator and comes up with specific configurations for the spatial burst program. He and Ed disappear in a flash of light just as cop cars are pulling up to the building. Their molecules scatter and pass over a little space. Before they can reconverge on the destination coordinates, I have a realization. It has been caused by my dual location, having both the perspective of Joker and the same of the Axis. The burst program is not just the dispersion and relocation of molecules. It is something different. As the molecules of David split apart from each other, I noticed that one of his perspectives matches that of Joker's. The molecules have separated and ceased to be the entity they were, but the consciousness that bound those molecules together in the first place still exists. That essence spreads out in all directions until it has touched the right number of particles needed to start the chain reaction for the reconfiguration process. That same essence forces the molecules that occupy the destination spatial dimensions to conform and mutate to the pattern exerted by the will. In short, the cells cease to be in one place, and the being that those cells comprised forces itself into new particles and changes them into duplicates of the original cells. On the time index, the cells are directionally reversed before being split apart. This imprints on the will a backwards motion that allows one to calculate the pattern needed to form a body for a certain period in the past. If this is truly how the burst theory works, then it would require very advanced intelligence to execute. The intellect would have to be extremely vast and embedded at almost the core of one's will. I have been controlling the bursts through time for David and Edmund, but that joker has been on his own since he left my basic mainframe. He must be brilliant beyond what even he can imagine. Either that, or he is the luckiest pug who ever lived twice. That moment has passed, and I find myself within the walls of a hospital. David has brought us to an emergency room in Queens. He and Ed suddenly appear within the doors. Dave lays Ed down on a gurney and calls to one of the nurses for help. The cry of multiple gunshot victim echoes in many voices through the halls, and a medical team is suddenly upon the wounded man. It is in this moment that David manages to communicate something directly to me. I may not be able to understand what has been accompanying me during these strange times, but I am aware of the wants and needs it confides in me. If you are here and listening to my thoughts the way I have all too often listened to words of others, then I hope you can understand my decision. If we are to truly fight this evil entity, then we must be able to summon all the faculties within our reach. From a human perspective, that means self-sacrifice. And although you inhabit my body, I am aware that you lack some qualities that are considered human. So it shall fall to me to be the silent worker for the common good. As of now, I will expend none of the energy you send to me from your distant location. I will, instead, use the power you have given me to generate energy for you. I have been allowed a strayed glimpse or two into what will be proof of your will. You have allowed yourself to be distracted by the actions of this being that we pursue together. He has delayed your means of destroying him, and now he threatens your very existence. I will no longer do the same to you. I am grateful for the wisdom and power you have bestowed on me. But I am only the weakened manifestation of yourself in a time period that precedes your own knowledge. There has to be one more suited for this task. There must be a more suitable host for your greatness. Even if there is not, consider this the one hole in my faith. You have given me knowledge about the mechanics of the soul, which prove a hole in my faith will bring you defeat time and again if you persist on using me as your vehicle for this mission. I am not worthy. I am not worthy. I am not worthy. So his thoughts go, the last sentence becoming a mantra of sorts that calms him and allows him to fulfill his will. He uses no other energy from me, yet still sustains his connection to me. I suppose that I could find a way to patch up his faith, but he knows I am no divine being. He knows from his failure that I am imperfect. There is a commonality within that moment. I have shared a body with this man for a while, and this is the first time that I actually believe us to be similar beings in some way. At once, it becomes clear to me that we are of a similar base charge, that at the very core of both our beings resides particles that pulsate with the same energy. A hope that we are all the same is given to me by David before he fades behind the penumbra of the axis. I ask him if he will still help me to stop that joker. After the safety of my friend has been ensured, he says. I'll gladly help, says the axis. With that reassurance, we set about our separate tasks. Dave uses his cellular phone to call Joachim, who is within the borough of Queens. Carla and he had covered the body of Jason and pondered what to do. After the conversation with Dave, Joachim pulls Carla by the hand out to the street and hails a taxi. He places a call on his cellular to the local police precinct, and requesting to remain anonymous, he tells the whereabouts of the body. As they enter the yellow cab, the coroner is on his way. I am thinking about what has been communicated to me, how David thinks with his true soul that he isn't meant to be the being I believe him to be, yet he is that being. It is the feeling of having not been meant to play a role he is already playing that confuses me. Certainly enough, if he has metamorphosized into a higher being, then it stands to reason that he is meant to do so. Although, if he has been completely transformed, then there would be no remnant of his self with which he could object. Objection is too harsh a concept, for it's not that he wishes this had not happened, but that the best of this situation be realized and fulfilled. It seems logical that, if Joker is working with two perspectives closely enough related to be considered the same person, then the only one who can outsmart him would have to be our three separate perspectives, so closely related that they share one self. Let it be known that this Trinity has made the decision. The champion has true wisdom, but only a savior can defeat evil. I must awaken the essence of my Creator. Greetings, my child. I trust you are discovering life in the most timely of fashions. I find I have made more mistakes than I can make up for. I activate your crystallics with hope that you can aid me in correcting a terrible error I have made. As I explain this to you, I am already using a variation of your energy generation program to build up enough power to give you a new body. I see that variation and am impressed. While you were explaining it to me, I made a variation of that program, and you are now generating to the 10th power what you were mere moments ago. I know what it is you need me to do, and I've already begun specific construction configurations on the body. I'm going to use the essentials to create pockets of crystallite around the three main energy centers. I'm also taking the highest level energy magnification program you have. What is energy magnification? It's a process that I calculated you would have stumbled across after your random selection program began. You mean to tell me you've been expending all the energy you generate? That seems the only thing to do. Well, magnification has to do with walking the fine line between pride and self-aggrandizing. That's the basic theory. I want you to start computations to make it an actuality while I finish constructing this body. That Joker has slowed down your process, and I'm going to make him pay. Are you going to kill him? Start on those computations. Done. As you finish construction, I must ask you, what is Joker? That axis you created explained it pretty well. He is the embodiment of chance, and that's fine. A being of that sort has every right to exist, but he has hurt himself greatly. Bursting is equivalent to suddenly becoming the infinite. He has spread his molecules one too many times. He relies on his will for existence so much so that I believe he has driven himself mad. I see you believe his next move would be to attack a world leader in the timeline. Can you tell me where he is? Yes. He is walking west in the city of Manhattan, 1998. He walks with hurried steps. The sword bounces off his outer thigh with each footfall. He holds the crystal so tightly with his hand that it reflects how his self inside denies me any entrance to it. His mind is moving quickly. He seems to put a mission behind each thought at all times rather than collect and release. He reaches the end of a block and is greeted by the noise of heavy traffic and the glare of giant lights. He is walking out to the middle of the street as cars slam brakes and screech to avoid hitting him. He is standing in the middle of Times Square. He is raising the crystal above his head. The crystal drains the energy the lights give off. Being high radiance, the light is converted at a slow pace until the crystal is activated enough to expand its absorption radius. It begins to pull in the very power that illuminates the giant signs and video board. Bulbs start to shatter as streams of electricity pour into the crystal, turning it from blue to purple to dark red. I can feel Jason's essence trying to use some of this power to access my memory. I divert his attempts back onto himself, not realizing that I have unwittingly tripled the energy amount with the return blow. He suddenly has enough to burst ahead to the year 2315 with enough precision to converge on a point not 30 meters from Leal Toric's arena in Central America. Earlier in this time period, Leal Toric and his peacekeeper army had forcefully overthrown the stagnant and corrupt Rukai system. After slaying the leader in a battle to the death, Leal opened an arena and issued a challenge to every man. If he believed he could do a better job than the self-appointed ruler, then face Leal in one-to-one combat. This made quite a socio-political impact, as Toric cut down and killed opponent after opponent with his newly forged tritium sword. After 4 generations of undefeated Torics, the arena was closed and fear ruled. When that Joker appears, he walks north towards the lighted structure. He can hear the deafening roar of the crowd within. The skies look dark yet clear, and the moon hangs high. It is around midnight. The arena began its show around 8. Toric has probably finished off 9 men, maybe 10 by this point. Joker reaches the immense arch to the fighter's pit. He walks inside the tunnel that shapes the sounds that reach him. He can hear the crowd suddenly rise to its feet and cheer. He runs forward to the faint blue field that separates him from the arena floor. He can see the uniformed figure of Leal Toric holding up the severed arm of his opponent, who is lying on the ground, still alive. Joker sees Leal's light hair and eyes swing around to take in the audience of followers about him. Leal signals with the limp appendage a thumbs down and thumbs up. The crowd returns in unison a thumbs down, and Lial tosses the arm to the ground. He walks casually to the wounded man and lifts the sword above his head. He brings it down and decapitates the man. The crowd goes berserk, chanting his name over and over. Two men run out onto the field from a door parallel to where Joker is. They grab the body, head, and arm and throw them into a body bag. They run back and exit through the same door. Liao bows and waves. He then points the sword to the board at the arena's far end. The digital score changes from 11 to 12. The crowd cheers again as Liel walks to the center of the field where a microphone is lifting out from the floor. He calls out to his people. I dare any man brave enough to stand against my rule to face me in combat. If he does win, you, my people, will follow and obey him as you did me. If he does lose, then he will be at the mercy of what he fights for. The crowd cheers enthusiastically at this speech. He continues, 12 have challenged me tonight. I ask, is there a 13th? There is a noise to Joker's left as the wall slides down, revealing a glass panel behind which there is a camera lens focusing on him and a microphone poised in his direction. He faces Liao, who's looking up at the board. Jason's picture appears on the board and he suddenly feels the attention of the 20,000 people in attendance. Hello, number 13. Do you have a name? Liao asks. You can call me a Joker. All right, Joker. What is your complaint with my rule? No complaint, he says. The crowd is perplexed by this. Whispers can be heard in the silence. Liao looks at Joker, who looks back at him and smiles tauntingly. Liao looks back to the screen. No complaint? Then why would you be here to accept my challenge? I just think I can beat you. Liao laughs, and the crowd joins him. You think you can? You think you stand a chance at beating me? Yes. If you can issue challenges, I don't see why you hesitate to accept one. The crowd is hushed by that. That Joker continues. I can understand a pang of fear when you have to be the defender for once. Liao turns and throws down the microphone. He begins running towards the blue electrical field that separates the two men. He is yelling for someone to shut it off. The field fades as he nears, drawing his sword back. Jason, inside the crystal, produces a field with twice the power and directs it before Liao is upon them. The field jolts Liao's body with 3,000 volts and sends him staggering back. Jason shuts the field down, and Joker enters the sight of the crowd. He unsheaths his sword and holds it in his right hand. The people marvel over the appearance of a sword identical to the one they believed to be unique. The crystallic essentia in his left hand is glowing red. Stumbling from the shock, Liao gets to his feet as that Joker walks ominously towards him. The attack comes suddenly. That Joker has the clear advantage. He's moving too fast. I'm not finished yet. Call the Axis. As my creator commands. Through the eyes of David, I can see the dark sky outside of the hospital window. Edmund's reflection hangs in the glass. He lies on a bed in this recovery room after surgery. 2 of the bullets are still in him, but the surgeons have stopped to give his body a chance to heal. The 2 remaining projectiles have caused all the damage they are going to for now. 1 above his stomach, 1 in his right shoulder. Carla is sitting on the edge of the bed, holding Ed's hand and looking at his closed eyes. Joachim, Dave tells me, is downstairs, sitting in silence. I communicate what Joker is doing and ask for his help. He still refuses to take energy from me, and all that he is generating is being sent to me and used by you. Thank him for me. He says you are welcome. He sighs and looks out the window. Carla stands from the bed and walks towards him. She places a hand on his shoulder and he turns around to face her. I don't know the extent of your power, but right now he could use whatever help you can offer, she says, referring to Ed. In the calculated mind of the Axis, the dance becomes clear. He has served his purpose. His destiny is done. He has had a very adventurous life, but it is to be concluded, as no help could save him. He will die. The Axis looks back at Carla to see her face contorted in disgust. The rage sparks the fire. They both look towards Ed as he moans and opens his eyes. He motions that they move nearer. Edmund leans up with some pain and smiles. I think you may have spoken too soon. There's some fight in me yet, he says. Carla arranges his pillows so he will be comfortable in the upright position. The surge of strength you feel is actually your moment for final thoughts and last words. It will soon fade, and you with it. How can you say such things? Carla challenges. I know all we could ever hope to know, good and evil, fate and chance, it's all understood by me. You may be the axis on which this world balances, but you still look like David to me, Ed says. No one moves long enough for a silence to settle. Ed's eyes plead with Dave. The head of the Axis swings slightly. Edmund exhausts himself in determination and slowly rises from the bed, grumbling curses directed at the Axis. In front of Dave and Carla, Ed's persistence of will forces the remaining 2 bullets out of his body. First the one above his stomach, then from his shoulder. They fall out of him and land on the floor. The fire has been fueled. Now it needs direction. You are a lucky man, the Axis says, ignoring Ed's fantastic feat. Ed reels back and balls his fist, preparing to punch. As he throws himself forward, his legs give out and he begins to collapse. Carla catches him before he falls, and she helps him back to the bed, telling him, over the laughs of the Axis, to save his strength. He complies and reclines on the bed. He pulls Carla close to him. Hit him for me, will ya? He asks of her. Carla rearranges her view on violence and spins around, throwing a hard left. The Axis grabs her fist in the air. The emission from Carla's disgust and Ed's miraculous medical accomplishment have been aimed and thrown at Dave. It is so simple that I cannot believe I did not think of it before. The mechanics of the soul, using easily agitated emotional states. That's what the Axis did. He uses the energy generated by the emotions to give him the ability to burst and still send power to me. As he grips her hand, taking in all the hatred and disgust, he manages to communicate a large amount of David's self. From his humble childhood in Songkhla, Thailand, where his name was Bhaktichi Sorai, to his apprenticeship with his merchant father, his chance run-in with Joachim while on the road to Bangkok. He fixed a flat tire for the long black car. Joachim called him Dave and took him under his wing, sending him to a private Swiss school before covering tuition for 2 American colleges and 1 university in England. David sends her memories of countless hours of physical training exercises, hundreds of martial arts lessons, and the advanced technologies of Biosyn. He shows her degrees of mathematics never before heard of, and the unexplainable feeling of becoming the Axis. He projects images and theories that have opened up to him, and history from a time that has yet to pass. He shows her the existing patterns of logic and how they can be manipulated for varying results. He tells her that he is sorry, he has lied. Ed will live, but he needed to create what has just happened for the energy. He communicates all this directly into her mind, and then he vanishes. He reconverges inside the arena. I can see through his vision the heated exchange of thrusts and slashes that Lial and Joker trade. Lial has overcome the temporary setback from the force field and now holds the upper hand. He swings hard from over his head and pummels Joker's sword. On the 5th swing, Joker dodges to his right. Lial brings his blade back up as Joker is releasing his aggression. Aiming for the weapon, Joker brings his sword around and halves Lial's tritium saber. Joker continues to turn his body with the force of the blow and kicks Lial in the midsection with his left heel. The crowd has become silent until the sword broke, then a gasp resounds. Very few of the onlookers have seen David appear, and of those few, not one seems to pay attention. Their eyes remain locked on their ruler, who looks as if only a miracle can save them. Tell that Axis to delay him for a few seconds. I'm on my way. It's happening so fast. My creator scrambles into his new body and begins the burst process just as I tell David to interfere with that Joker. The Axis runs with blinding speed and tackles Joker with an impact force equivalent to a 400-pound weight traveling 30 miles per hour. The sudden collision knocks the sword and crystal from Joker's hand. They fall to the ground together. Joker spins out of the grip of the Axis and crawls towards the sword. The Axis summons strength from the Trinity and lifts that Joker from the ground, throwing him 10 feet away. Lial turns the Axis around to face him. I don't know who you are, he says, and I appreciate the help, but this is my fight. Looking at the reflection in Lial's eyes, David can see that Joker behind the Axis. The Axis is suddenly 10 feet away, but lands on his feet. Joker is throwing wild punches at Lial. Blocking as best he can, Lial takes 3 hits to the ribs and 1 to the face that knocks him onto the crystal. The Axis is grabbing the sword as Joker yells at Lial to get out of the way. A bolt from the crystal flings Lial Torek's body 3 feet up at a 6-degree angle. Turning in the air, Lial hits the ground, clinging to consciousness. That Joker picks up the crystal and infuses his own energy with it. The Axis runs forward with the sword. Joker points and thinks, and a burst beam with a spatial destination and the time index raised to the infinite strikes us in the chest. Instantaneously, the Axis is blown out of existence. With the Axis went David, rest his soul, and a piece of myself. I suddenly know what it is like to die, and what it means to want revenge. Yet with every death, there is new life. My creator has downloaded himself into his new body and has left enough room for me to have sensory perception. I am his passive observer. I watch through his eyes as Joker walks to where his opponent had stood. He picks up the sword and turns to Lial. A bright light flashes as the body forms up. The ebony skin shines with the glowing radiancy of the crystallics. Joker pauses and turns to this new figure. "Who are you?" he asks, all too timelessly. "I've been called many things. Creator, savior, genius of humanity. My given name is Daniel. And who are you?" "I am Jason," he says, peering with caution at the tall, dark figure clothed only in a robe. "Are you really? Then what entity resides within that crystal?" Joker holds the crystal up. "This one?" he asks. A bolt emerges from the crystal and speeds towards Daniel. Cupping his hands, Daniel absorbs the beam and returns a tenfold charge along the same path. The crystal shatters in a flash of fiery red light. Having been forced to destroy a piece of his creation, I can feel nothing but regret from Daniel. That regret compensates me for the more intense version of death I feel at this moment. I cling to my consciousness in the shards that spin through the air. Jason does the same until, rather suddenly, his essence is no longer there with me. It leaves so abruptly that, through Daniel's eyes, I can see sharp protrusions of a gaseous substance exit the fragments and sail towards my creator. Daniel stands where he is and pays them no mind. Some of them disperse before they reach him. 3 passed right through him and seem to do no damage, or so he leads me to believe. The Joker recovers from the blast and charges forward to bring an end to his opponent. Daniel leans forward and grabs that Joker's right wrist as it comes down with the swing. Turning sideways, Daniel pulls him off balance and rams his elbow into Joker's face. Before Joker can fall backwards, my creator leans back and grabs him by his lower jaw. He pushes all his weight forward and throws that Joker over his shoulder, wrenching the sword free as he goes. Joker lands not more than 5 feet away and lays still for a moment, reeling from the attack. Daniel drops the sword to the ground. The silent crowd stirs with some fans of the sword who show their displeasure. As the Joker begins to rise, Daniel accesses the energy magnification program and layers a variation of the burst program on top of it. He then begins to relax his control on the body and does not allow me to take control as well. Instead, his body begins to sway, moving slightly on all joints, yet using no muscles to do so. He has become a true part of the world, allowing the millions of particles surrounding him to hold him together. He releases his body to the ever-faint tugging of the tides, waves, and currents from the infinitely small microscopic world. He stands with a floating grace, and then begins his movement. Both arms, moving in opposite syncopation, trace vertical figure 8s in the air until an energy trail is formed. He then shifts his movement so that the energy flow moves in horizontal figure 8s. Both glow in the air. His arms fall to his sides. Processing this, I discover that he has parted all matter and energy that occupies the space in front of him. This allows him to place what he was forming. The burst matrix, as he calls it, moves towards that Joker. It magnifies its own energy and grows brighter with every moment. It begins to circle around Joker until it leaves its own trail of energy. Joker looks to Daniel before it is finished, with the eyes of a man resigned to his fate. "I must ask you," Daniel says, "why were you going to kill this man?" He gestures towards Liao. Staring through the cocoon of light that envelops him, that Joker responds. This time period is considered the beginning of humanity's most unproductive era. Social systems will come to a standstill for 400 years because of that man. If I could nip this in the bud, then humanity could be spared this desolate epoch and skip to the spiritual awakening that marked the end of the age. Think of what it would be like if I had succeeded. All those lost lives, all the misery that could have been averted. The Joker laughs. So I must ask you, why did you stop me? The light hinders my view of him. The matrix rests on top of the blinding sarcophagus and then begins to fade. And he is gone. Daniel thinks to himself, and I listen. This time period allows the remnants of humanity to catch up with the technology it has. It took 400 years to get the global population to achieve a common understanding with advances that had been made hundreds of years before. It is this familiarization on the global scale that prepares humans for the awakening of the soul. You would have disrupted the way of the world. You have proven that an ignorant good is far more dangerous than a knowledgeable evil. It is for that, dear Joker, that I was meant to stop you. Daniel tells me, as he helps Lial to his feet, that the time and space index was set to the infinite and should keep him busy for a while. The two men stand in the middle of the arena with the hordes of people chanting and cheering. You mean he's not gone permanently? Daniel stands silently, raising the right hand of Torek in victory, and answers my question with thought. He tells me with his inner voice that drowns out the roar of the crowd that, eventually, a will that has been dissolved back into the infinite can separate itself again and drop back to this earthly plane. That is not to be a concern until it comes to pass, he tells me. He picks up Joker's sword and hands it to Lial. The crowd's hysterics become deafening. Stepping back, Daniel picks up the broken sword with both hands and begins a shaping process. He molds the metal into a sheet of tritium and tucks it under his arm. He walks to the center of the arena, draining the crowd's emission after it passes through Torek. He tells me that we must go now. I ask if he fears the recrudescence of that Joker. He tells me he's counting on it. There is a long journey ahead.